أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the 8th review session of the Al-Maghrib course Torchbearers. This course was taught by Sheikh Walid Basuni, and this review session is brought to you by Qabilat Bushra. We begin with our 8th scholar, Al-Qurtubi, who was also known as the Sheikh of the Mufassirin. We do know that he was born in Andalus in the 7th century, and he passed away around the age of 60 years in southern Egypt. Another interesting thing that we know about his early life and his appearance was that he wore, his clothing was basically very clean and simple, and he usually wore a kufi on his head and nothing else. So he had a very simple appearance with just a simple kufi on his head. The Sheikh actually showed us what the kufi looked like. So he grew up in Cordoba, Andalus, in a very simple home, and his father was a farmer. And when his father passed away at the age of 15, his father was killed by a group of crusaders, and so he wanted to know whether if his father was a shaheed or not, and so how should the janaza prayers be held for his father or not. So he went to a scholar and to ask him whether if he should treat his father as a shaheed, and the scholar gave him one answer, and so he was a bit confused. So he eventually ended up going to many scholars, and what this story is an indication of is that there were so many scholars who were available to him. So he was surrounded by great scholars and a lot of knowledge at that time. He was around 25 years old when Cordoba fell, and he ran out to save his life. And he talks about it that he was reading Surah Yasin, and when he dropped into the field, hiding himself, and the soldiers were unable to see him after that, and he escaped eventually. Some of the other factors that shaped his life, of course, included the fact that he witnessed the fall of his homeland firsthand. He saw that happening. He became a historian because he was often contemplating the weakness of the Muslims and how they could regain their power. So he would contemplate all of these things a lot, and he became a historian, and so he started writing a lot. He learned under numerous scholars in Andalusia, and what meant was living in Andalus was that he had access to the greatest public library, which the public library of Cordoba had over 200,000 books at that time. That is pretty big. And what they knew was that there was no single illiterate person in Andalus. So education was free for everyone, and everyone was educated. And so he had a lot of exposure to not only different cultures, but also different scholars, and that made him very well-read and very knowledgeable. And since education was free, his being not very rich did not hinder his access to knowledge. We do know that he basically would focus his knowledge on a lot of solid foundation that was unique to his time, and that his knowledge was not limited to just one field. So he was a scholar of tafsir, hadith, fiqh, usul, and many things. So he was also something that we know with those that he was very, very interested in the current affairs of his time, and he focused on solutions to the problems. So he wouldn't just list the problems, but something that he was very, very focused on was coming up with solutions. So anytime he would see a problem, he would write about a solution to it and not just talk about the problem itself. He wrote a lot of books in a broad spectrum of fields. He essentially spent more time writing than teaching. Some of his more famous pieces of writing were his books of tafsir, and there's a very interesting event that is listed in the notes regarding the goat. And so please go ahead and read that. I'm not going to give you that story here. Do read that event, and it's a little funny and it's interesting. He eventually passed away in the month of Shawwal in the city of Alminia, and some of the lessons that we learned from his life, and there's a whole list of this in your notes. We've written down everything that was discussed in class, and so I think the foremost one that we need to remember was translating your knowledge into actions and coming up with solutions to problems, because he was more focused on the solutions than he was on the problems. And that is our eighth scholar that we discussed. Inshallah, do remember that the exam is on March 12th, and it will be available at almaqra.org between 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Please do take the mock exam, as it will help you prepare for the actual exam. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.